Today I'm going to walk you through knitting a raglan cardigan sweater. And if you're wondering what raglan means, it's just a sweater style where the sleeves are shaped with diagonal lines that go down from the neckline to the underarm. It's a flattering, comfy fit and one of the easiest sweater styles to make because it doesn't require any seaming. We'll knit this cardigan from the top down so you can try it on as you go, and I'll walk you through everything step by step. By the end, you'll have a cardigan that fits like it was made just for you because it was. All of the links you'll need are in the video description. I've linked to the free pattern as well as the materials required to make your cardigan. Besides the written pattern, you'll need the following supplies. This pattern is written for worsted weight or Aran weight yarn. The yardage will depend on the size you're knitting, and you can find this information in the pattern. You'll also need a pair of size 10 circular knitting needles with a 32-inch long cord, some scissors, and a yarn needle to weave in the ends, 8 stitch markers to mark the raglan seams, and finally some scrap yarn or extra cables to hold the sleeve stitches while you knit the body of the cardigan. We'll begin by casting on the stitches using a long tail cast on. To keep this video to the point, I'm assuming that you know how to cast on, knit, and purl. Each size has a different amount of stitches to cast on. Take a look at the pattern to find out how many you need to cast on for the size that you're knitting. For this tutorial, I'm making the small size, which means I need to cast on 42 stitches. Once the stitches have been cast on, we can begin the setup row, which is a wrong side row. Since we're knitting and stockinette stitch, this means that we will purl this row. We're also going to add stitch markers as we purl to mark the raglan seams. Each size will be different on where the stitch markers are placed and on how many stitches are between the seams, so check the pattern if you're making a different size. For the small, we need to purl 1 stitch before placing the first marker, and this will mark the beginning of the first raglan seam that separates the front of the cardigan from the first sleeve. Then we'll purl 3 stitches and place the second marker to mark the end of the seam. Now we can purl the stitches for the first sleeve. For a size small, we need to purl 4 stitches. And then once the 4 stitches are purled, we can place the markers to mark the seam between the first sleeve and the back of the cardigan. Place the first marker, purl the 3 seam stitches, and then place the second marker. And now we're at the back of the cardigan, and we're going to purl 20 stitches for the size small. So these stitches are for the part of the cardigan that covers your back. And then once that's done, we can place markers for the seam that separates the back of the cardigan from the second sleeve. Now purl the 4 stitches of the second sleeve and place the final markers to mark the seam that separates the second sleeve from the other side of the front of the cardigan. And then purl the final stitch or stitches if you're making a different size. Your work should look something like this, with 8 stitch markers to mark the 4 3-stitch raglan seams. This will set us up to knit the yoke, which is the top part of the sweater that grows to cover the neckline, shoulders, back, and start of the sleeves. Once the yoke is done, we'll separate out the sleeves from the body, but for now it's all one piece. Okay, let's get started on the yoke. We'll knit the first stitch and then make an increase before the first stitch marker. And we want this increase to lean away from the seam, so we're going to work a make one right increase. To make one right, we need to pick up the bar between the stitches, like so, and then place it on the left needle so that the needle is going through it from back to front. Now we just knit the stitch through the front loop. And we've increased by 1 stitch, and the new stitch will lean away from the seam towards the right. Then slip the first marker to the right hand needle, knit the 3 seam stitches, and slip the second marker. And now we'll need to make another increase that leans away from the other side of the seam, which is to the left this time. So we're making a left leaning increase. And to do this, pick up the bar between the stitches again and insert the left needle through it from front to back this time. So it's the opposite of a make one right. And then we'll knit the stitch, but this time we're knitting it through the back loop, and this will add a new stitch that leans to the left. And we're going to continue to knit, making an increase before and after each seam. The increase before the seam will always lean to the right, and the increase after the seam will always lean to the left. So when you reach the next stitch marker, make one right, then slip the marker, knit the seam stitches, slip the next marker, and make one left. So we're making one increase for every stitch marker, and these increases are on the outsides of the seams, leaning away from the seams. So for each knit row, we are adding 8 stitches to the row. So it's a good idea to count while you're getting the hang of it to make sure that you didn't forget an increase or make an increase where you weren't supposed to. And that's it for the knit row. I'm going to finish knitting this row while making the increases around the seams. And I'm also speeding up the video a bit just to keep this tutorial from getting too long, since I still have a lot to show you, and I'm just repeating the same steps to make the make one right and make one left increases before and after the seams. Remember, we're only increasing on the rows that are knit. And since we're knitting in stockinette stitch, the next row will be a row of purl stitches. And for that row, we don't need to work any increases. We'll just purl all the way down, slipping the stitch markers as we go. So we're just alternating rows of knits and purls, and on the knit rows, we're making the increases around the seams, and on the purl rows, we're just purling all the way. This is absolutely my favorite part of knitting raglan sweaters because I love to see the progress and watch the yoke grow with every knit row. So keep going, alternating knit rows and purl rows and increasing only on the knit rows. And once you've reached the stitch count indicated in the pattern for the size that you're making, you'll have completed the yoke part of the pattern. Now the next step is to separate out the sleeve stitches by moving them onto some scrap yarn, or if you have extra cable needles for your circular knitting needles, you can use those as well. But I'll use scrap yarn since I think that's what most people have laying around. We'll knit up to the first stitch marker and then remove it since we're no longer growing the yoke. Then knit the next 3 stitches and remove the next marker. Now we're at the first sleeve. Thread a tapestry needle with a couple of feet of yarn and then use the needle to slide the stitches up to the next marker onto the yarn. So these are the sleeve stitches, and we're just using this scrap yarn to hold them while we finish knitting the bottom half of the cardigan. Okay, once you've got all of the stitches transferred, you can remove the next stitch marker and use a removable knot to secure them on the scrap yarn. Now we're going to add a few stitches to the underarm area by casting them on with a thumb cast on. And remember that I'm just following the pattern for how many stitches to add here, so make sure that you check the pattern as this is different for each size. So for the small, we need to cast on 3 stitches, and that's it for the first sleeve. Now we'll knit up to the second sleeve and then move those stitches just like we did for the first sleeve. And don't forget to remove those stitch markers as you go. If you forget, it's okay, you can just get them on the next row. And once the stitches for the second sleeve have been transferred, we'll cast on the underarm stitches just like we did for the first sleeve, and then finish knitting the remaining stitches. And since the rest of the body of the cardigan is knit in stockinette stitch, the next row will be purled. And then you'll alternate knit and purl rows until you're ready to knit the bottom ribbing. And don't forget the pattern will tell you exactly how long this length should be, but of course it's up to you if you want to make your cardigan longer or shorter. Okay, I've worked a few more rows and now I'm trying it on to make sure that there's enough space under the arms. Remember, the front will get wider after we pick up stitches to add the band and collar. So if you try it on and are happy with how it fits, continue knitting until you've reached the desired length. And remember that there will be some ribbing at the bottom and that'll add a little bit more length. So keep that in mind as you go, or just follow the pattern and it will tell you exactly how many inches to knit. And when you've knit enough inches in stockinette stitch as per the pattern, or in this case, I want the cardigan to be more cropped, so I stopped a few inches short of the pattern recommendation, you can begin to knit the ribbing along the bottom. We're going to work a knit 2 purl 2 ribbing, which is a nice loose rib that won't cinch in too much. And to knit the knit 2 purl 2 ribbing, all you do is knit 2 stitches and then purl 2 stitches and repeat to the end of the row. So we're going to work 8 rows of this ribbing and then cast off in pattern. I like to use a stretchy bind off when I'm casting off rib patterns, and this is my favorite method. Since the first 2 stitches are knit stitches, we're going to knit them. Now we'll place them back on the left hand needle and then knit them together through the back loop. The next stitch is a purl stitch, which means we'll bring the yarn to the front and purl it, and this will maintain the pattern. And since this stitch was purled, we'll cast it off by purling it together with the first stitch on the right hand needle. Then we'll purl the next stitch because it's also a purl and cast it off the same way by purling it together with the stitch on the right hand needle. Now we're at another knit stitch. So bring the yarn to the back and knit the stitch, and then knit it together through the back loop with the stitch on the right hand needle. So what we're doing is if it's a knit stitch that's coming up, we knit it and then knit it together through the back loop with the stitch on the right hand needle. And if it's a purl stitch, bring the yarn to the front, purl the stitch, and then purl them together. And this will create a bind off that is stretchier than it would be if you just bound off in pattern, which is great for ribbing. So work your way down the row and continue binding off until there is just one stitch remaining. And then we're going to cut the yarn when we reach that last stitch and pull the tail end through that last stitch to secure it. And now we're ready to knit the sleeves. And it doesn't matter which sleeve you start with since the instructions are the same for both. So pick one and we'll begin by picking up the stitches with the same circular needle that we've been using. And we'll knit in the round using a method called the magic loop method for knitting in the round, which is a genius way to avoid double pointed needles. When I learned this method, I never touched double pointed needles again because it's great when you're knitting sleeves or anything with a small circumference. You don't have to juggle 4 or 5 needles. You just need one pair of circular knitting needles and you split the stitches between the two and just keep moving them around. So I'll show you what I mean, but for now, let's pick up the stitches one at a time from that scrap piece of yarn that was holding them. And now that all of the stitches are on the needle, we can remove the piece of scrap yarn. I'm just untying the knot and pulling it through. So I've split the stitches up so that about half of them are on each side of the cord, and this will help with maneuvering the needles when we knit using the magic loop method. So you just bend the cord and split up the stitches so that approximately half are on each side. And now we're going to pick up 4 stitches under the arm. This is a pretty big gap, which means you'll need to be a bit creative in how you pick up the stitches and try to spread them evenly within the gap. So since I need to pick up 4 stitches, I'm going to pick up 2 on each side of the halfway point. And I don't really follow any particular method here. I just choose a location that looks like it'll hold the stitch securely and not leave a hole. Also, it's a good idea to leave your tail extra long when you attach the yarn so that in case there is a hole, you can go back and use that yarn to sew it up and hide it. And once you've picked up 2 stitches, you'll want to place a stitch marker before picking up the second pair of stitches because this will mark the beginning of the first round. So the 2 stitches we just picked up are actually the last 2 stitches of the round, and then the next 2 stitches will be the first 2 stitches of the round. Okay, I've picked up the 4 stitches and this is what the underarm looks like. There aren't any huge gaping holes and I'm happy with how I have picked them up, so I can begin to knit the sleeves. I'm going to move the stitches on the left-hand side of the cord onto the left needle and then knit them as normal onto the right-hand needle. Now we want to turn our work so that we can knit the stitches from the other side of the cord. Slide them onto the empty needle, and now this will be the needle that the stitches are knit off of. And we'll also push the stitches off of the other needle, which is now on the right, so we can knit onto it. So that's all there is to the magic loop method. We're just using the long flexible cord to hold half of the stitches while we knit the other half. And I also want to point out that when I knit that first stitch, I try and hold it as close as I can to the last stitch that I had knit from the previous side. And this will just make sure that there's no run in between those two stitches, because just like with double pointed needles, if you don't knit that first stitch tightly, there'll be a run in between. Now we're going to just keep knitting in the round for 10 full rounds before we begin to decrease and shape the sleeves. And remember that the end of the round is marked with a stitch marker. After completing the 10th round, we're going to decrease by 2 stitches in the next round. And since I'm knitting the size small, I'm going to have 48 stitches on my needles right now. To figure out where to place the decreases, we need to divide the total number of stitches by 2 and then subtract 2. 48 divided by 2 is 24, minus 2 is 22. I'll finish off the 10th round by knitting the last 2 stitches before the marker, and then we'll knit 22 stitches and then make the first decrease by knitting 2 stitches together. So stitch 23 and 24 are going to be knit together. So the first needle contains the first 21 stitches of the round. So I'm just knitting them, and I've sped up the video. And then when I reach the second needle and knit the first stitch on that needle, that's the 22nd stitch. So now I'm going to knit stitches 23 and 24 together. And to knit them together, you just insert your right hand needle into both stitches as if to knit, and then just knit them. Then we'll knit 22 more stitches, which will bring us to the last 2 stitches, which we'll knit together again. So we're knitting 10 rounds and then decreasing on the 11th round until we reach the stitch count that the pattern says to stop at. And then from that point on, you're just going to keep knitting until the sleeve reaches the length specified by the pattern. Or if your arms are shorter or longer, you can stop where you think is best. Just keep in mind that the cuff will add some length as well. So for the size small, I'm going to stop when there are 40 stitches, and then I'm just going to keep knitting until I need to knit the cuff. This is also a good time to point out that eventually you're going to find that you need to knit 2 stitches together that aren't on the same needle. And that's no problem at all. I'm just going to shift the stitches around by bending the cord on the other side and then sliding a few stitches over. So if you ever want to rebalance how many stitches are on each needle, that's all you have to do. And when your sleeve is long enough, you can work 8 rounds of the same 2x2 ribbing that we used for the bottom of the body and cast off with the same stretchy bind off method. And then repeat this entire process for the other sleeve. Once you finish both sleeves, the final step is adding the edging around the front of the cardigan. We're going to pick up the stitches all the way around the front and then work 8 rows of 1x1 ribbing. We'll start with the right side facing us and work clockwise from one bottom edge around the collar and to the other bottom edge. So if you look at the last stitches of the first few rows, you'll notice that they are purl stitches from the ribbing. And we're going to pick up the horizontal bar at the end of each row and knit into it. So we'll insert the needle under the bar and then knit the first stitch. So grab your yarn and knit that stitch. And then we'll do the same thing for the next bar above it and work up until we reach the end of the ribbing. So we'll insert our needle again into that bar and then knit it. So this is how you pick up stitches along a purl edge. And then when we reach the end of the ribbing, the remainder of the rows will be stockinette stitch rows. And we'll pick them up exactly the same way. So we'll find that little bar next to the edge of the stitch and pick it up by inserting our needle in underneath it and picking it up, and then just knit into that bar. And then find the bar right above it and repeat. So continue working your way up the side of the cardigan, picking up the bars and knitting into them. And then once you reach the neckline, I'll show you how to pick up those stitches because they're a little bit different. So once we knit that last stitch before the neckline, we need to change up how we're picking them up since we're working along the top edge of the piece instead of the sides of the stitches. So we're working into the tops of stitches now. And these stitches are actually much easier to pick up in my opinion. So instead of looking for a horizontal bar, we're just going to insert the needle through both legs of the top of this knit stitch and then knit into that. So again, find the next stitch and insert the needle under the top legs and knit it. And then keep going all the way across the top. And when you reach the end of the neckline and begin working down the next side, you just need to pick up the horizontal bars again. And when you finally picked up all of the stitches along the edge, you can begin the 8 rows of knit 1, purl 1 edging. So alternate knit and purl stitches until you get down to the end of the row, all the way around the edge of the inside of the collar. And depending on how many stitches you've picked up, if it was odd or even, you'll either end with a knit stitch or a purl stitch. If you end with a purl, the next row will be worked exactly the same as this one. So you'll begin with a knit and then purl. But if you end with a knit stitch, that means you picked up an odd number. So you don't want to knit the first stitch of the next row if this happens, because then you're going to end up with seed stitch. So just make sure that your knits and purls match up. That's it. Work 8 rows total of the 1 by 1 ribbing. And then, oh, you could also do more than 8 rows if you want a wider band, just letting you know in case you find that this is too thin. And then you can cast off in pattern. I don't recommend the stretchy bind off for the band because I find that it makes the stitches ruffle a bit when working 1 by 1 ribbing. So you can just do a normal cast off in pattern. So to cast off in pattern, you knit or purl the stitches as they appear, and then you pass the first stitch on the needle over the stitch that you had just knit or purled. So it's a much quicker cast off, and in this case, I find it looks better for just the collar since we don't need it to be stretchy. And then once all of the stitches have been bound off, you're done. You can weave in any loose ends, and if you choose, you can block the cardigan by using either a handheld steamer or soaking it in water and laying it flat to dry. You don't have to block it, but it will make your stitches look more even, and you can even mold it to fit how you'd like. So if you feel like the sleeves are too short, you can stretch them out a bit, or if they're too narrow, you can make them a little wider, and same with the rest of it. So I recommend this step if you have the time. Plus, you're going to wash it anyway, so you might as well. And here it is, the finished cardigan. I'm so happy with how mine turned out, and I hope that you love yours too. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the Liliness channel for more free tutorials and knitting inspiration. Also, when you like my videos, it helps others find them too. Bye for now.